Here we go.
Tell me what to do to make
Pond
all
Boss
my
Magazine
wonderland
coming up.
dreams come true.
Hello, everybody. Bob Lusk, the Pond Boss, coming at you live from the balmy, warm hills. Actually, it's been pretty nice the last couple of days. We've had a lot of rain of Gordonville, Texas, up near Lake Texoma at the west end of the lake. I see Todd Austin checking in. Somebody else is in, but I don't see who it is. So, hey, thanks for joining me. I don't really have a topic, although I kind of do. So I'm all over talking to you about your questions and situations and circumstances. So throw some questions at me. But what I thought I'd do is talk about some of the things that have been going on lately. I see Josie checking in, Dick Tabbert, Kim Moore, trying to get it on my laptop so I can see these comments a little bit easier. Oh, there it is right there. Holy cow, already found it. Woo! That didn't take long. And you guys know the drill. You guys that have been watching this show lately, you guys know the drill. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments section. Click like and share this to your timeline, and you are eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss hat. There it is right there, living in full color. Well, sort of full color. Pond Boss. And a mug that knows how to, say it with me, keep hot things hot and cold things cold. And we don't know how it knows, but it knows. So anyway, I wanted just to share some things that have been going on. I see Matt Marsden with American Fish Tree checking in. Dan Drollop, good to see you guys. Let me see here. I want to expand this out so I can watch it and see. Justin Shank checking in. Ryan Johnson. Let me see here. All right, let me see who I can see. This is who I can see so far. If I've already greeted you, I know you're there. Travis Paul Smith. Yes, sir. Jerry Oler is checking in. Let me see who else. It won't show me. Okay, well, I'm glad you guys are here. Lately, it's really been kind of fun. I see Ben Brinkman. I see Ben checking in. There's Bruce Condello checking in. Hello, Bruce. Good to see you, my dear friend. From Lincoln, Nebraska. Grows some of the biggest fish on the planet in his circumstances. So, let me see here. Make sure I'm going the right direction here, which I think I am. Yep. So, anyway, there's Michael Gray, one of the nation's leading lake builders from Middle Tennessee around Nashville part of the country. There's Leanne checking in. Todd Austin's got the drill. Hey, you guys know how to do that. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Type that into the comment section. Click like. Share this to your timeline, and you're eligible for the drawing. Rob Connors checking in from Indiana. Battling watermeal all day. Man, that's the smallest freshwater aquatic plant in the world and one of the hardest to kill. So good luck on that endeavor. There's ways to do it. I see Chance Burt's checking in as well. Mike Cottrell, happy for the rain. We got, Mike, I know you got a pretty good amount of rain where you are up here along the Red River. We've had a low pressure system come and sit on top of us for about a day and a half. And a lot of the area got 3.5 to 5 inches of rain. We got about 1.5 inches to 1.25 inches in the second rain. In the first rain, we had a little over 1 inch. Well, that's greened up the grass. It's made things, it just gave everything a nice fresh breath and ran off a little bit of water into our ponds over here at the house. So that's a good thing. You guys know that we can't wait to forget about 2020. God, what a weird year this has been. But I started thinking about it. I read a post somewhere on Facebook a few days ago. And think about if you were born in 1900. If you were born in 1900, when you were 17, the flu pandemic hit, 20 million people died. It didn't end until you were about 19 or 20 years old. By that time, you're in the middle of World War I. World War I was like when you were 16, 17, 18 years old. And then about the time you started becoming a pretty good adult, like in your 20s, 28, 29, the stock market crashed and the Depression started. That lasted for 10 or 11 years. And then World War II hit. 20 million people died in that war. And then after World War II, wasn't long until the Korean conflict hit, and then the big pandemic then was polio. And it took 5 years to find a vaccine for polio, if I read the records right. And I grew up with kids that had polio. One leg was shorter than the other, and they had joint issues and things like that. So, and then about that time, I guess when somebody that was born in 1900 turned 60, 61, 62, you had the Cuban Missile Crisis. and President Kennedy was assassinated. LBJ took over. The civil rights movement kicked in full gear at that point. Riots ensued. The Vietnam War escalated. We had the hippies that I thought would outgrow that. They're still hippies here in their 70s and 60s. So at that time, if somebody was 65 years old, they're watching the Vietnam War. They've got family and friends in it. And by the time they hit their 80s, it was the AIDS epidemic. And so really, we're going through some hard times, but I know these hard times are going to pass. I know it. And we've seen riots before. We didn't understand it in the 60s. We didn't understand 911. We didn't understand any of that stuff. Just like we don't understand it now. But what we do know is that it built a stronger faith within some of us, especially the silent majority that isn't going to go out and have to fight those battles every day, which I wish we could, but we fight in the ways we can. Well, during this latest pandemic, it started registering with me. I started seeing a trend in phone calls. So people started ringing my number that were sheltering in place at their weekend place. So these are people that, and this may be some of you guys, I don't know, but there's some folks that live in the city that have property in the country that they bought as their weekend retreat. A lot of folks, that's really went. So I've been getting a lot of phone calls from people that are sheltering in place, and these people are probably in their mid-50s to late 70s that I've been getting phone calls from. And they have been roaming their property, been studying their property, becoming better stewards of their land and water. And a classic example, I had a couple call me last week that would love to build about a 6-acre lake on their property. And so now they're doing their due diligence. So now they're learning the process of planning how to build a pond or a lake. And I went and met with them and drove over the property with them. They've got a pretty good site for about a 6 to 10 acre lake. And so they're asking me preliminarily, what do you think the dirt work would be to build this lake? Well, I just ran some numbers really, really fast without digging any holes or trying to find it out. And I said, this could range anywhere from $65,000 up to $250,000. They said, well, how do you know the difference? I said, well, there's more homework to do. So they're all ears about doing their homework. And, they said, can we do something for about 150? My common sense says, yeah, you can. Is it what you want? Well, they kind of winced a little bit at that process. Said, wait a minute, have you priced a tricked out bass boat? And the guy says, you know what? I just ordered an airboat because they're out on the Red River, and he loves to go up and down the river. He's in his early 60s, and he's just loving to get an airboat where he can climb on the airboat and go up and down the Red River and just have fun. He's going to spend $60,000 to $80,000 for that boat. And a tricked out bass boat is $60,000 to $80,000, and you're not going to pull it with that pickup. You're going to have to get another truck to pull that cool boat with. So pretty soon you're going to be spending $130,000, $140,000 on a boat and a truck that when you pull off the lot are going to lose 25% of the value the minute that you drive off the lot after you buy those two things. Well, you can spend just a little bit more than that and have your own private lake that adds value to the property that's not going to depreciate with mileage. So we were going through some of that stuff, and going through the due diligence, and I thought I'd go through that with you guys today just to talk about some of that due diligence. Let me see who all we got going on here. Holy cow, a bunch of you have joined in since I started talking. Let me see here. Mike Cottrell, happy for the rain. Yep, me too, man. Eric Adcock, good to see you. Zach McCamey. Hey, Zach, good to see you, man. If I remember right, I think Zach lives in eastern Arkansas, maybe? Harrison Davis checking in from Georgia. Perry Cook, Clark Cole from Weatherford. Brett Kick, Tom Davis from Central Ohio. Harrison Davis got it. Zach Bollinger from up Pennsylvania, as I recall. Steve Lewis, fisheries biologist from Hot Springs, Arkansas. Tim Moss, how you doing, Bob? Still leading a pretty cool life, man. It's pretty cool being me. It really is. Sometimes, I used to tell this to people. I'd say, sometimes after I had a pretty cool day, I'd go home and I'd lay in bed that night and just kind of review the day. And I'd just start giggling because I'm jealous of myself. Because I do get to do some really cool stuff. Let's see. Zach Dombeck, Nathan Reisdorf. Holy cow, we got lots of folks going on here. Steve knows what to do. Mike Cottrell is ready to move to the country. A lot of folks have done that. A lot have. There's Jacob West. Connie, I guess that's Fred Bingham hailing up from his rotator cuff surgery. Let's see here. Not on topic, Zach Bollinger says, but I love the new song by Trace Atkins, Mind on Fishing. A funny song. Boy, that is a pretty cool song for these times. I heard it on the radio for the first time a couple of days ago. Thomas Willis checking in from Laurinburg, North Carolina. I know the Willises in Laurinburg, North Carolina. Dustin Crawley, Chattanooga, Tennessee. Jacob West got the hey, hey, hey going on. Billy Birch, Catfish Birch from Southeast Texas. Been doing good. Jason Jones, your job has to beat sitting in a cubicle. What's a cubicle? I know, smart Alec. Smart Alec Lusk. Well, all right, so here we go. You guys throw me some questions, and I'll be looking for them, but I'm going to tell you some of the things I've told these people. Now, in the last 2 weeks, I've gotten 3 phone calls from people that want to build a lake, which that's not necessarily unusual, but they don't usually come in waves like that. It's usually one a month or one every 6 or 8 weeks where they want to talk about it and maybe do it after they do their due diligence. And I would much, much, much rather somebody call before they move any dirt than to call me when the lake is finished and half full of water, and then they want to start talking about fish. So what these folks have got is they have an artesian well on their property, and they want to take advantage of that water. There's a lot of groundwater along the Red River where these people's place is. There's Drew Bachman. I haven't seen Drew in quite a while. Good to see you, buddy. You're from South Carolina, Greenville. Loves Pond Boss. Got you a pond, buddy. So anyway, there's quite a bit of groundwater there, and some of it manifests at the surface. And I guess years and decades ago, this particular spring, somebody was able to cap it, put a pipe in it, and it flows probably, they didn't know. They said it was a 2 7/8 inch line running full. Well, when I looked at it, it was probably more like 40 to 50 gallons a minute at the most. So we start doing some math, and it was sitting in the wrong place for a lake. Well, as it is, the water flows and goes on downstream and goes into the Red River and moves on down to Lake Texoma and on and on and on. So anyway, as we started doing some homework, the very first thing I asked them is, what are your goals? What is it that you want to end up with? And they said, we have, our home is in Houston, but we are like 6 hours away, and we've got a son that lives in the hill country of Texas around Austin, and we'd really like for him to bring his wife to come up here. And he married a girl that grew up on a ranch, so she's all over coming up here and spending time with us in this rugged country, away from the rest of the world. But he's not quite as receptive, but he loves to fish. So we thought we'd see if we could build a lake, if it makes sense to build a lake, so that he would come up, bring the grandkids, bring his wife, and spend time with us and go fishing. Plus, we like to fish. So as I talked to him, I said, what if he were to come out here and have a good day, what does that mean? So the husband said, well, it means fishing half a day and maybe catching 20 to 30 bass, the average upwards of 2.5 to 3 pounds with some 4 and 5 pounders in there, with a legitimate chance at a double-digit bass at some point. I said, well, you need a lake for that particular goals, for this site. You probably need to look at one that's bigger than 6 acres so you can grow numbers of fish that size. So knowing the goals, plus the wife is a prolific reader. She would love to have a place to come sit in the shade beside the lake, on a dock or in a boathouse or in a boat and read. She loves that. And she likes to fish. So as we started drilling down into the goals, it made sense to me. They're like a lot of folks that I get to work with. They have an idea what they want, and they thought they could use this artesian well to fill it and keep it full. There's not enough water to keep it full or fill it. There might be enough water to compensate for evaporation, but the elevation's wrong. So as I started looking at the topographical maps, is where I always start. I start by looking at topo maps. And I look to see where the best sites are based on the elevation and the fall of the land. Now, in that part of the country, they've got more than 150 feet of fall from the highest point of the land to the lowest point, which isn't even the river. The river is probably another 100 feet vertically down. So they're sitting up, a couple hundred feet above the river vertically. So I looked on the topo maps and I found 3 sites that were suitable for lakes. And one site in particular, and this is on 950 acres, there were 3 places. where a lake would work. So I started doing a little homework, figured out about where a dam should be on a map, and then calculating the elevations, how tall the dam would be. In this case, the dam would be about 700 feet long and 20 feet tall at its tallest point. And so I started kind of running the numbers on how much dirt that would take from the ground up. Well, at that point, I've measured the watershed, which is about 120 acres. 120 acres would support a 10-acre lake in that part of the country. So the watershed size makes a big difference based on the average annual rainfall of that area. A lot of Texas, 8 acres, 8 to 1 is a good ratio, 10 to 1 is a reasonable ratio. This is about 12 to 1, which that's for that part of Texas. They're right on the cusp of where the rainfall begins to diminish average annual rainfall. So that watershed of about 120 acres would support a 10-acre lake, and that's about the size it needs to be for that watershed. So the next thing that they're going to need to do is get somebody out there that can read the dirt and start digging some test holes in and around the site where the dam could be placed. So job 1 is the watershed. Job 2 is to see what kind of dirt. If it's sandy dirt, like typically runs along a river, that ain't going to work. If it's rocky soils, ain't going to work. We've got to find clay. So the next part of the due diligence is to see if there's some clay out there. So that's what they're going to be doing next, is they're going to bring Mike Otto out there with an excavator or a backhoe and start digging some test holes and just see what's under the ground around where that site is. Now, one thing we can say with confidence that over 950 acres of land, that's their life investment, by the way, is there's going to be some clay there. But is the proximity to the site going to be good enough that it's efficient to move that dirt? So here's the drill. There's a process to go through. And I got to talking to Mike because Mike Otto, I said, man, I probably have talked to 3 or 4 people in the last 2 weeks, and I keep telling same people or different people the same things over and over and over. I'm thinking about writing a little 8-page how-to kind of a thing on the process of what you go through when you're thinking about building a lake. He said, well, Bob, I wrote about it. And I thought, you know what he did? And it's right here. It's in Just Add Water. And I got to looking, and it's also in this book here, Perfect Pond. Pond Boss sells both of these books. I think this one's $20, and Otto's book is $30, I believe. So I started digging through there and looking at these books, and I found places. I mean, I wrote this book, but I don't remember what I put in it because I haven't read it in a long time. So I started digging through it. I think I wrote this book in, I don't remember, 2007. So this book's 13 years old, but it's got in it what we need to know to be able to do the due diligence about building a lake. So I've started digging through it. And one thing I do, you guys already know, I tell a lot of stories. Well, I put a lot of stories in this book of actual circumstances, case studies that people have gone through, things that people have done. And so I'm going to go ahead, when I get a minute, Otto and I are going to spend half the day together tomorrow traveling, going to look at a lake site. And as we go, I'm going to type up that 8-page, whatever it is, just the backbone of what you do for the process of deciding how to build a lake, where to build a lake, and all the thought processes that go with that. So I think that's going to be pretty appropriate to do. So these folks now, they know that it's a practical idea, but the next thing they got to know is what kind of dirt do they have. So what are the obstacles? And when you get ready to build a lake, there's always obstacles. One of the things I used to tell people is let's get the dirt guys out there because they're going to be the ones that are expensive, and let's figure out, or that's where you're going to spend the most money. So let's get out there and let them do their homework and come up with what they think the costs are going to be. And then when they give you a bid on a lake, building a dam and a spillway and the pipe and all that, the overflow pipe, you look at that budget and then add 25% to it because you don't know what's underground. So even though you can do all the due diligence on the planet, if there's something you might miss, because when it comes time to start digging that dirt, there are unknowns 5 to 8 to 10 feet underground. And I can see Michael Gray going like that. I mean, he's got a hammer on the front of his track hoe so he can bust up the rocks. Michael Gray knows he's going to get into rock, but what's it going to be? Is it going to be karst? Is it going to be sandstone? Is it going to be gravel beds? Is it going to be limestone? But there's so many unknowns that you won't figure out until you get that heavy equipment on site. But there's a lot of things you can do before you ever move one spade of dirt to begin to figure out what it is that you want to do, and at least start doing some homework so you're not totally surprised when things get going. Let's see here. Robert Dyer says, can you feed train red ear sunfish? It's very tedious, but yes, you can. It's part of, like Bruce Condello's on here. He's already answering this question out loud because I'm late to the hunt on this question. But what Bruce does is Bruce has a basement that he dedicates to a recirculating recirculating system where he aerates the water and purifies the water with filtration. And so what he does is he brings in small red ear, maybe 2 to 3 inches long, puts them inside a tank over the wintertime, and he presents fish food to them. He starts off with a mix of moist food, and I'd have to get him to give you the details, but he uses, what are the brine shrimp, I believe. He uses some other kind of crustacean type things that red ear love to eat, and he starts them on that. Then he converts them to dry food over a long period of time. And so it takes, we'd have to get Bruce to chime in here. Bruce, if you're listening or still watching, how long does it take you to really feed train the red ear, and how many do you get to feed train? So if you put 500 red ear in a tank and you start to feed train those little boogers, how many of them end up on feed? And my guess is going to be probably half end up on feed, and that'd be a big number because it's just not their nature to eat fish food. Now, I don't know any fish hatcheries that sell feed trained red ear sunfish because it's really hard for that to happen. And so they struggle with it. It's kind of a hard deal, but the answer is you can train some of the red ear. There's not much chance that you're going to train them in a pond. So if you've got red ear sunfish in there with your bluegill and your bass and such, you're probably not going to train those fish to feed. They're probably just not going to do that. Terry Dooley, what do I kill coontail with, and how? I've always used aquatic glyphosate with a good aquatic surfactant. The surfactant is the smart part. The surfactant breaks down that thick, waxy coating of the cattail leaf so that the glyphosate can enter and kill it. Now, there's other things out there. If you guys want to learn more about plants, go to Aquaplant. That's the website, AQUAPLANT, Aquaplant. Texas A&M has produced that. Their fisheries extension specialist handles that, Todd Sink, and so he's the guy, and there's lots of pictures. Job one is to identify the plant. You've heard me say that, but there's the different options for treatment are on that website. So I'd go look at that as well. Gene Saunders checking in. Tony Sutton checking in. Let's see what Travis Paul Smith said. I had to laugh. I was slow to buy 3 Texas Hunter feeders because of the price, but I spent $100,000 on the property the last 3 years. Feeders and MVP are the best choices I ever made. See, I think that's hilarious because people do spend a lot of money to build a lake, but it's a good investment in almost every case. If you do your due diligence and you build a lake that's suited for that site and you go through the right processes, you're adding value to your property. I promise you are. Now, in areas where there are a lot of ponds, you may not add the same value as there are in areas where there are fewer ponds. But I promise you, for a recreational piece of property, you add a well-built, well-thought-out, well-manageable, and well-managed lake, it's going to add value well beyond the cost of building the lake. I get phone calls on a fairly regular basis. I say fairly regular, probably 5 to 10 calls a year from guys that are looking for property where they say, I'd really like to find a place that already has a lake on it. And a good lake. And there's been many, many times that somebody will come. Matter of fact, tomorrow, Otto and I are going to go look at a piece of property near Athens, Texas, where a man has made an offer to buy the property, and he's 2 weeks away from closing. And he thought, you know what, I want to get somebody out there to take, because the main reason he's buying it is for the lakes. There's 2 lakes. There's one that's about 25 acres and another one that shares with a neighbor that's 16 acres. And he wants to be sure that those dams were built right, and he wants us to review the records and the history of the management of these lakes. And I know the landowner that he's buying it from. I know how he manages his water. So it's an honor to be able to go take a look at that and then testify to this new landowner what we think about it. It's smart on his part to pay a few $100 for consulting fees to do that. So, and I like what Travis said. You spend $100,000 on the property, but you don't want to spend $850 for a great feeder to grow feed. I get that. Unless you can understand the value, and now Travis understands the value. He sees the consequences of having a great fish feeder, and Texas Hunter by far is the best feeders on the market. Not only are the products good, the customer service is good. I can make a call to Texas Hunter and talk to Chris Blood and tell him what we want, and it's either going out that day or the next day, even though they're having to work remotely until San Antonio's mayors and leaders, whatever you want to call them, decide to let people go back into business full time over there. So anyway, so I like what you wrote there, Travis, because you're right on the money. John Henry, good to see you, bub. Andy Myers is checking in. Mark Dyer, Jason Jones, the pond we own is an old sand and gravel pit. Typically, the water is very clear. Last week, about a third of the lake water was an orangish brown color. Visibility usually around 6 feet. And in that part of the lake last week, it was only about a foot. After about a week, all was back to normal. Any ideas what may have caused that? Yes, I do have an idea what may have caused that. What very likely caused that to happen was you developed a plankton bloom or some kind of an algae bloom. And when that bloom matured, it died. So what would give it an orangish color, orangish brown, is either going to be a kind of an algae, which there's so many different kinds of algae, a handful of them have that brownish orange color, or it could be zooplankton that have fed heavily on the plankton bloom and they died mixed with some algae. So if all was back to normal in a week, I wouldn't worry too much about it. But probably what happened was that bloom matured, then it crashed and it died. Could have been triggered by a rainstorm. It could have been just triggered by it just ran out of food and died. And when those things die, when that plankton dies, algae dies, depending on what kind it is, it's like a lot of other, I'm going to use the word bodies because that's what's coming to my mind. They'll float. So as the cell breaks, so these algae float. Blue-green algae, it might look like you've got green paint on top of the water. This probably looked like you had orange paint in a line around the edge of the water. That stuff, as it decomposes, it floats. And when it floats, the wind pushes it and piles it up. Then over the next few days, those cells will burst, they'll release their contents, and then they'll decompose and they sink. And that stuff goes away. There's Ron Ardoin. Ron texted me earlier. I was on the phone almost all day today, Ron, so I didn't get a chance to chime in back at you. But Ron's said that he's seeing some fish kills in South Louisiana. Well, fish kills in South Louisiana is going to be temperature related, most likely due to toxins from plant die-offs or from buildup below the thermocline, and the back-to-back rains that you've gotten will cause the lake to lose its thermocline and flip. That's the kind of things. But I would just about bet you 99 out of 100 fish kills in South Louisiana right now is going to be caused by some water quality deteriorating, even though the cause of death, the biologist might say, well, it was oxygen depletion. Well, it's easy to say oxygen depletion, but it's not so easy to figure out why, what happened. Willie Howe, my next door neighbor's checking in. David Schneiderman, Easy Doc. So if you guys are looking for a doc, this is the doctor of docs. Oh my gosh. I just gave you a new nickname, David. Latham Pugh, fishing right now and listening. Put up 2 more feeders for a total of 4 so far. Attaboy. You're going to see Latham is over in far east Texas, not far off of Interstate 20 west of Shreveport, Louisiana. And he's going to see some big results over there from feeding his bluegills. I see Tommy Davis again. Harrison Davis, what are some other reasons why California produces so many giant largemouth bass besides stocking their lakes with trout rich in nutrients and fats? Well, one thing about California producing giant largemouth bass is their climate. Because the areas you see those fish grow huge, it's a climate that's similar to Florida. What's ironic is Florida doesn't produce giant bass much anymore. So what that tells you, Florida has great genetics. Okay, listen, we're going to get into a little genetic talk here. Genetics are huge. They're huge. Huge bass have huge bass genetics. But the problem runs into the dynamics of that population. Do they have the right amount of food, the right amount of water chemistry that's healthy? Because every day that a fish is stressed out because it doesn't have anything to eat, or the water quality ebbs and flows through the course of a day with pH high, pH low because they don't have the right minerals or the right alkalinity, they're going to lose a day of growth. And if they lose more than 4 or 5 days in a row of growth, they can't make that up. Now, if a fish doesn't eat for 2 or 3 days, it can make that up. But if it doesn't eat for a week, it can't make that up. So you see that at the end of its life. It's only going to get so big. So what's going on in those handful of California lakes that grow those huge fish? Absolutely, yes, trout play a huge role in that because that's a consistent food that's perfect for bass of larger sizes. So that is selectively feeding the bigger fish. But if it wasn't for superior growth rates, wonderful habitat, and really good clean water, those fish wouldn't get that big. So if you can replicate that, duplicate that in other places. Now, another thing about areas of California where those fish grow so big, their climate is conducive, which means that their water temperatures stay within the range. Now listen to this. This is real important. If you're trying to grow giant bass, to get to that size, job one is to get them up to 16 and a half or 17 inches long. The quicker you can do that, the greater the chances are that that fish can get to really big double-digit sizes. A 10-pound bass is huge, but if that bass can get to 16 to 8, 17 and a quarter inches within 2 years, that fish has got a shot to get up to 14 or 15 pounds. And you don't see very many fish that big in private waters. You just don't. If you see one, it makes the news. You know, there's a handful of lakes around the nation that have grown a legitimate 15-pound bass that has been weighed, measured, authenticated, and proven. I hear stories all the time about 15-pound bass. Show me. Show me on a scale. Prove it. I don't believe it. I don't. Because all these circumstances have got to come together for those fish to grow that big. So here's what I want you to remember. Temperature is huge. If the water temperature can stay between about 62, 63, something like that, not get warmer than 83 degrees, that's when you're going to see the best bass growth. And the best part of that range is in the 70s. So from 72 to 78, that is prime temperature for bass to grow huge. So if they've got the right kind of food at the right time to go, they can. Now here's one of the things about these California lakes is they're deep, like 75 feet deep. And in those deeper lakes where the water's relatively sterile, quote unquote, the clarity's high, they have got a thick mesocline. So in other words, their thermocline might be 8 or 10 feet thick. And the trout can live in that. So even in the summertime when the water temperature gets up into the 70s and low 80s, the bass can go down into that thermocline where there's still enough oxygen to support trout, which is about 7 parts per million. They can go down in there, feed, and then come back to their prime temperatures. So that temperature down there is probably 60. And I'm shooting from the hip on this. I've not studied this. I don't know. I'm just telling you what I know. What I know is those trout have got to be living in cooler water or they're not going to live. Well, the bass can go down and eat and then come back up into where their perfect temperatures are. So it's a combination of factors that we don't see replicated in some of these other states. So there's about all I got to say about that. So Joe Sipes, I see Joe again. Terry Dooley, that was coontail. Oh, coontail, not cattails. Oh, okay, my bad. I bet I read that wrong. Coontail, my go-to choice is aquathol. I like aquathol, but I'm still going to tell you the same thing is go to Aquaplant and take a look at that. It's going to show you your different choices. One thing I've done is I have never enjoyed killing plants. I don't like handling chemicals. I don't enjoy getting in a boat and spraying plants. It just wasn't fun to me. I did it for probably 25 years, and then I delegated it, and that was 15, 16 years ago. So at that point, I was familiar with that lineup of products, and my go-to at that point was Aquathol. Today, my go-to would be Aquathol for coontail. But what I'm telling you guys is that there are other choices that may be more economical. And if Kelly Duffy checks in, Kelly Duffy's the guy that would know this stuff because that's his game. Kelly understands the plants. He knows plants better than anybody I've ever met, and he's our go-to guy. He works for Helena, so that's where the herbicides can come from. So he's a herbicide supplier. So this is kind of his specialty. I see Mitchell Morgan checking in. Mitchell's checking in from the Raleigh, North Carolina area, as is Jim Morgan. Jim Morgan from Laurinburg. Good to see Jim. I haven't seen Jim in a while. Let's see here, Zach Bollinger. And also don't forget, if you have a small creek, where did the creek need go before? Also don't forget, if you have a small creek, where did the creek need to go before? I'm not quite sure what you're saying there, Zach. Oh, creek bed. Where did the creek bed? Oh, where did the creek bed go before? Got it. Okay, so in other words, when you're getting ready to build a lake, part of your due diligence is not only studying that watershed, but figuring out, because most of the time, in most areas of the nation, flat areas are different, but in areas where there's water, elevation changes, people are going to build a dam in a creek, and it may be just a dry creek that only runs when it rains. But that creek bed is meandered over eons. And it may be here now, and it could have been 150 feet over there, 10,000 years ago. So part of your due diligence, and I can hear our good buddy over there, Michael Gray, talking about it right now, right here to the screen. He's saying, you know what? You got to go dig a good core trench. So part of the reason you dig a core trench is you want to build a foundation on which to build the dam, but you also want to see what's under the ground, because if that creek bed is meandered and you miss it, that's an exit plan for water, and the lake's going to leak. So you got to cut, and every lake bed ends down somewhere. It might be 10 feet deep, might be 5 feet deep, might be a foot deep. But you got to dig through that creek bed to get beneath it, so you can build an underground barrier in a core trench, an underground wall of compacted clay, so water can't seep under the dam and leave. And that means going through that creek bed. We got to get a little drink of water. Let's see here. See who else we got going on today. Ken Dowd, hey Bob, I got my water sample test back and I have an excessive amount of phosphorus. Any suggestions on how to reduce it to normal levels? All right. And look at there. There's Danny Mack checking in. Danny Mack made it. Todd again. I see Todd. Okay, so Ken, with your water sample, and you've got a heavy amount of phosphorus, that probably means you have a heavy plankton bloom. Well, I'd be looking at Foslock. Look at that. Also, look at Floating Islands International. Now, that's if you'll look at some of the work that Bruce Kanya has done with Floating Islands International, he's figured out how to extract phosphorus from irrigation water coming out of the Yellowstone River in Montana, where farmers irrigate corn where they over-fertilize. So the water hits the corn absorbs some of it, but the rest of it migrates down into cobble that turns and flows right back toward the river. Well, Bruce collects some water in what he calls Fish Fry Lake with huge amounts of phosphorus in it. And he's the inventor of floating islands. And so he uses plants to take up take up phosphorus, and then he harvests the plants. And the plants can also convert nutrients to fish flesh via periphyton, things like that. So it's kind of a little bit of a complicated science, but Foslock can bind it and send it to the bottom. You can use alum, but you got to know what you're doing. If Matt Rail checks in, I'd be talking to Matt about that as well. And as a matter of fact, Mitchell Morgan on here, he works for Johnny Foster Lake Management. He can talk to you about it as well. So connect up with Mitchell, and he can help you with that. Okay, Scott Angelico. Hi, Bob. My water sample was hardness 340, alkalinity is 260. Is that ideal? Scott, I'm going to tell you that that's a little bit above ideal. Now, I would rather have alkalinity at 260 than alkalinity at 30. Now, 260, the hardness at 340, that's fine. Alkalinity at 260, what that means is you're going to have the opposite problem as what, let me see here, let me back up, is what Ken Dowd's got. What's going to happen when your alkalinity is that high, a lot of your phosphorus is going to be bound and not usable for a plankton bloom. So you're probably going to have the kind of lake water that's going to need fertility from time to time, and you're going to have to use more fertilizer than recommended because the alkalinity is going to absorb and bind that phosphorus and sequester it out of the water. But for growing fish, those numbers are great. You know, my tendency there would be to tell you to feed the fish a little bit more heavily, and then see if you can try to get a bloom in the spring. I wouldn't try it now because I'm not sure where you are, and I'd be real tempted to not do it right now. Okay, Terry Dooley says coontail, not cattails. Yep, I missed that, but I fixed it. Okay, Nathan Reisdorf, have a 3-acre tank near Laredo. Anytime somebody says tank, I know they're from Texas, and they're probably west of I-35. Have a 3-acre tank near Laredo. Plankton bloom caused water visibility to go to 10 inches. Should I run aeration 24 hours a day? Worried about water temperatures being too hot during the day. Only running aeration at night right now. Okay, you know what? I'm going to tell you my philosophy on that. I think running it at night is smart. I think turning it off during the daytime is also smart, because what happens is your temperature is what it's all about. Now, the 10 inches of visibility, if that's due to a plankton bloom, I'd sure look at thinning that plankton bloom out a little bit if it doesn't run its course soon. If it stays at 10 inches for the next 3 or 4 weeks, I'd sure look at doing a partial treatment using a chelated liquid copper compound to try to get your visibility up to 20 inches if you can. Now, on the philosophy about running the aeration system, you're in Laredo, so it's hot. You guys have probably hit 100 degrees several times already. So what you want to avoid is having the water temperature getting much into the mid-80s. So that means you're going to run it from 9 at night till about 9 in the morning, in my opinion. Now, the reason you run it at night, it not only is for the temperature, but it also helps move the water to where it can contact the atmosphere and increase oxygen levels. Now, during the daytime, you're not worried about oxygen levels because with a plankton bloom like that, they're going to be cranking out a lot of oxygen. So you're not going to have any oxygen issues during the day. Now, when your visibility is 10 inches, and you guys need to listen to this, when visibility is 10 inches anywhere on the planet, that's a setup for a fish kill, because a 10-inch visibility in warm water where the temperature is in the 80s, remember, water's affinity for oxygen drops as the temperature goes up. It can't hold as much oxygen when it's hot like that than it can when it's cool. And then when you've got that fertile of a plankton bloom photosynthesizing during the daytime, it's going to do the converse at night. Now, the good news is we have long days right now, so we've got 14 hours, 15 hours, whatever it is, of sunlight through the course of day, and the rest of that time, when the plankton bloom is respiring, it's consuming oxygen, giving up carbon dioxide. So when you got the aeration system running at night, you can counteract that oxygen consumption and mitigate that some and help keep the oxygen levels pretty steady without giving up the temperature rise that you'd get if you ran that thing 24 hours a day. But I would sure be looking at taking out some of that plankton, some of that algae especially, if it stays at 10 inches or it reduces even more. And if you need some help, you need to find a pond management pro that can help you with that down there. All right, Dale Baden with Texas Hunter. He's thanking Travis. Travis might get a Texas Hunter hat. Hey, Dale, yeah, send him a... Oh, yeah, he said it right there. I'll happy to send you a couple of hats. There it goes. There we go. He's ahead of me. Let's see. Ron says, lots of rain and cloudy days. Luckily for 2 ponds, I saved the fish by having one owner back an outboard motor and an eyelet across the surface, and another owner backed his bush hog across the surface and eyelet through the afternoon into the night. No more dead fish. Okay, what that suggests to me is when you have lots of rain and cloudy days, then you've had a plankton bloom that's probably crashed. When that happens, it's consuming oxygen. So by putting in an outboard motor, to stir the water, that helps move the water, which can help regas it with fresh oxygen. So those ponds are perfect candidates for an aeration system that can it's not necessarily going to prevent a fish kill, but it sure can go a long ways to that. And that just refer back to the conversation I just had with Nathan Reisdorf about what he's talking about. Because what Nathan is doing is he's using an aeration system to decrease the risk of a fish kill from oxygen depletion. The chances of Nathan, you having a fish kill from an oxygen depletion is not gone, because if that, for example, that 10-inch bloom, if all that algae died at once, there's not enough way that you can move enough water to replenish the oxygen from the atmosphere that like diffusers do than what's being consumed by that mass of decaying algae from your plankton bloom. So there we go. I see Mitchell Martin on there again. Danny Mac's already at 79 degrees, air rating 11 to 11. Yep, I can see that. Tommy Davis, pond dye could help with coontail too. I'll concur as long as the coontail is at least 3 feet deep. If that coontail is manifested at the surface, you can put all the dye on the plant. It looks like the tidy bowl man been swimming in your pond. It ain't going to make any difference on that coontail. What dye does, now understand this, when you put pond dye in a pond, what you're doing is you've pretty well eliminated UV light penetration below about 18 inches. So what's going on there is that means that you're not going to have any primary productivity, which not only can you take out plants that need UV rays to be able to grow, you're going to be taking out whatever's growing in the water column that your fish need. So you'll take out your plankton bloom as well. Now, dye does not kill anything. What it does is it restricts sunlight penetration and allows that to do something about the plants. So, Jeff Thompson adding 8-inch F1 females to the existing pond in spring 2021. What is the ideal forage for those fish in upstate South Carolina? Well, first of all, I hope they can sex an 8-inch female or an 8-inch bass. I hope. Depends on your source. American Sport Fish Hatchery, I've watched them with their pipette tubes sexing fish. I'd have to ask them about 8-inch fish, because 8-inch fish typically aren't sexually mature yet. So I'm going to answer the question, leave that laying right where it is. What's the ideal forage fish for those fish in upstate? Now, I'm going to go two directions. If this is a brand new pond with no fish in it, and you're going to stock the bass on top of forage that you've developed, I'm going to tell you bluegill, fathead minnows, and red ear sunfish are going to be your starting points. And these fish are going to be feeding on fathead minnows, and if they're 8 inches coming to you in the spring of 2021, that means they're a year old and they're feed trained. So they'll also eat fish food depending on how many you put in there and how big the pond is. Now, a lot of times they'll go off feed if the stocking rate's low. Now, if you're going to put those into an existing pond that already has fish, be sure that that lake is ready to receive them. What that means is make sure your bass are not overcrowded. If you've got crowded bass, take the time to catch a bunch of them. Make room for these new fish for next spring. If you'll do that, then your food chain will rise on its own, and it goes back to the backbone being bluegills and red ear sunfish. And in that case, in an existing pond, I'd be looking at something like threadfin shad as well. So there's the answer for that. Let's see. Danny Mac says, why isn't chlorine so cheap, used to kill a pond, and it dissipates? Well, part of the reason that chlorine is not recommended is it's toxic to everything. Where rotenone is toxic to creatures with gills. And plus, it takes quite a bit of chlorine, and as soon as it touches the dirt, it binds. Now I've used chlorine before to go ahead and when you drain a lake and you get ready to renovate it, there's always puddles. And you got to figure out how to get something into those puddles to eradicate the remaining fish that are in it, or don't do anything with it until those puddles evaporate out. But I have used chlorine before. Okay, but it's not a legal fish toxicant. Now, I've not felt uncomfortable because it's used in our drinking water of all things. But it's not a selective killer. It'll kill pretty much anything it touches, including you. If you drink too much of it, don't drink it. Let's see here, Scott Angelico. You know what? Thanks for the reminder. I forgot you're in Florida. I knew that. You come on here all the time, and I need to remember stuff like that. Let's see here. Danny Mac says, I'll have to watch the recording. I think I'm getting throttled. Uh-oh, somebody's caught you watching this show. What are you doing watching that guy on Wednesday nights? Don't you know you should be in church? Unless evaporating at night? That's a great question. Evaporation rates are not just limited to daylight hours. Evaporation rates are influenced by two things: how dry the atmosphere is and how warm it is. So evaporation rates probably drop a little bit at night, but if that humidity is 15 to 20%, that air is like a sponge. It's going to be sucking that water up no matter what the temperature. It'll even do it in the wintertime. You have evaporation in the wintertime, and it's due to the low humidity in the air. Air is amazing. It wants to absorb. It's a sponge. You know, just like water is a sponge. Water absorbs everything it can, including air. Air is going to absorb water in the form of evaporation. So let's see what else we got here. Y'all throw me some questions. Ron says, thanks, Mr. Baden and Texas Hunter. There we go. Dale Baden is president of Texas Hunter, by the way. And, you know, every time I do this show, I thank Texas Hunter for being a sponsor. I love Texas Hunter. I love your customer service. I love working with Chris and you and Cody and everybody there because you guys are very responsive and the products are top notch. And I love Purina Mills too. Purina Mills made an effort and made an attempt and made a commitment back in 1995 to produce feeds for the sport fish industry. Now, they've had their hiccups along the way. You know, a lot of big corporations do. But Purina Mills, in my opinion, has got the go-to feed, and I'm proud to endorse their feeds because I use them in my ponds. I've grown some huge bluegills, some really nice feed-trained bass, harbor stripers. I got a catfish pond. One of my buddies caught 10 catfish over the weekend and cleaned them all and ate them for supper. Fed the neighborhood. All right, let's see. Jordan Roberts, I work in American sport fishing. Yes, we start sexing our bass at 6 to 7 inches. Good to know. I didn't know that. I wasn't sure how big, because I've been there when Shane was doing that. And when I said Shane, I meant Sean. When Sean McNulty is sexing those fish with a pipette and having, struggling to find eggs in some of them. So I did see, some 8 to 10 inch bass where he was being real successful with those bigger ones. No, okay, Danny Mac was getting throttled. I guess that wasn't by his wife. That must have been by his computer. Step on the throttle, Danny Mac. Micah Jefferson, could you do an episode on crappie ponds? Or if you give me a reference to search for Indiana here. I can do a piece of an episode on crappie ponds. I just got to remember to do it. It's 7:22. Let me go ahead and hit that topic right now since you brought it up. Here's what you need to know about crappie. Crappie really need big water in order to successfully thrive, reproduce, grow big enough, and have enough catchable size fish in an environment that also includes other species. So here's what I mean. In small waters, crappie in warm water lakes and ponds, south of the Mason-Dixon line especially, crappie spawn first every year in warm water ponds. So their babies are coming off the nest about the time the other fish are beginning to spawn, so they can eat the babies of the other fish. So they can limit recruitment. Now, they're also inconsistent spawners. Crappie will come up, and if the temperature changes 3 degrees, they'll run away and not come back for a few days. And then they'll come back when the temperature's right again, and they'll try to spawn. If the temperature drops again, there was a couple of years in a row where we had back-to-back cold fronts every Friday that drove the temperature down 5 to 8 degrees each week. Crappie didn't spawn. The females just absorbed their eggs. So we lost that year class of crappie in private waters. Now, they're predator fish limited by their mouth size. I mean, a pretty big crappie's mouth is about so big, right? You guys see that? That's probably an 8 to 10 inch crappie's mouth right there. Well, bluegill can outgrow the mouth size of a crappie within about 90 days. So crappie have a hard time controlling numbers of bluegill as their primary source of food. So they rely on small fish. So they're gonna interrupt and interfere with the recruitment of the other species of fish. Okay? And the thing is in conjunction with other species of fish, you might be able to grow 25 to 35 pounds of crappie per acre, period. And of those, maybe 30% of those are harvestable size fish. Now, here's what inevitably happens, and it's not a matter of if, it's more of a matter of when. At some point, the crappie reproduce so well that you have so many babies competing for so much food that they wind up growing up to 3 or 4 inches, and then they stunt. And I've literally sampled, the worst case I ever saw was a lake. When I say worst case, the most revealing case I've ever seen was a lake that was about 30 acres where the crappie gained a big foothold and overpopulated, and it was a fishing club with no budget, and they wanted me to come. They couldn't catch any bass. So I went and analyzed the lake, and I estimated in that 30-acre lake, working with a crew from Texas Tech, way back like in 1981 or 82, we estimated there to be about 170,000 crappie in that 30-acre lake, 4 inches long, little thicker than a postage stamp, 7 years old. And they had completely eradicated all reproduction of all fish. So we had to figure out how to get their numbers down, and the only budget these guys could come up with was $1,000, which would buy, back then, 1,000 hybrid stripers big enough to eat those little crappie. And that's how they started to revitalize that lake, and it worked, and then that lake went dry in the drought of 2014. So where I'm going is that crappie are a little bit tough to manage in small waters. So if you want crappie, here's something that's real important about this kind of topic, guys, is you got to have the best habitat for that species of fish. So what that means is you need to know, I'm out in the country, and there goes a kid on a scooter, on one of those little push scooters, out here on a rural country road. Okay, with a backpack on her back. Well, maybe she's running away. We'll go check in a minute. Going back to the crappie, you better have the right kind of habitat, which means here's what that means to me. Now, anytime I'm designing a big lake in today's world, I design crappie habitat in the middle of the lake, like standing dead trees that might be 25 feet tall with a big canopy. And the landowner almost always wants to debate me about it. And my comeback is I know you don't want to stock crappie. You're not planning on stocking crappie. You ain't going to stock crappie. But that don't mean they won't show up. And if they do, we want to sequester them the best we can by creating the best habitat for them. Because if you do get some, you want to be able to go out and find them clustered and catch them. They're schooling fish. So create the best habitat for the species of fish that you're wanting to stock. And if crappie's one of them, you better have great crappie habitat. Because other than the 2 to 4 weeks a year that they're spawning, they're trying to find deep water, cool temperature, schooled together of similar sized fish in cover or in structure. So that's the way I would look at that. That's the way I'd look at crappie. I advise people not to stock crappie. Anytime somebody says, I want crappie, I had a guy call me today near Cleveland, Texas. He says, I want crappie. Well, anytime anybody ever says that, what they're telling me is they want a fish that they love to eat. And crappie are great table fare. Not often do you hear somebody say, hey, I want to catch crappie because of the fight they put up or how big they get, or just how much they dominate a pond and we can brag about them. Everybody says, I want crappie because I want to eat them. And so I look at it that way. So if that's really the mission, I try to guide people more toward feed-trained bluegills. You can grow a 2-pound bluegill. It's not easy to do that, but you can grow a 2-pound bluegill that would taste just almost as good as a 2-pound crappie will. And so I'd really think twice, long and hard. Now, I'm not going to tell anybody watching this show to not stock crappie. If you want to stock crappie, stock them. But you need to know what you're dealing with. If you don't have the right kind of habitat, you're not going to get the results you want. If you don't have the right food chain at the right time, you're not going to get the growth rates. You got to understand that they recruit, reproduce, survive intermittently, unpredictably through the course of time. So there's my crappie spiel. So let's see here. Danny Mac, hope he smoked those catfish carcasses. Oh my gosh, wasn't that good? Holy cow. No, I didn't. He took them with him. Let's see. Drew says, I would love to do an episode on small spring-fed pond do's and don'ts. You know what? I could do that. Just help me remember that. Hey, Drew, send me an email. Because I'm probably not going to write that down. I got to scoot out of here in about 1 minute. Sherry and Carrie, Chris and Carrie Lusk joined in. Good to see them. Ron, I've tried sexing bass with the probes. I'm about 60% accurate. Lessons from American Sport Fish. I need lessons from American Sport Fish. I believe it's all about the angle, Bob. It's always about the angle, Ron. It's always about the angle. And you've got a nephew that knows about that. Hopefully American Sport Fish will be at Pondology in October. And what are the exact dates? Hey, you know what? We have rescheduled the Pondology. And I will send out an email probably Friday with those dates. I think it's the second week in October for Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We've got room for 3 or 4 more people. If you guys want to come, drop me a note and I'll send you the information on it. Let's see here. Harrison Davis, great show. Best thing on Wednesday night. Thanks, man. Let me see what else we got, and then I'm going to check out. Thank you for the crappie presentation. But really, I try to remember when friends talk about crappie and they're yeah, that's right. Shane McIntyre missed the show. His dog got sprayed by a skunk. Well, look for tomato sauce, buddy. Look for tomato juice. That'll help. So, hey, listen, I really appreciate you guys tuning in. And if you got some ideas for topics, send me an email, boblusk@outlook.com. Don't forget, Pond Boss Magazine. A number of you have been subscribing, and I appreciate it. You can subscribe. So, appreciate you guys looking, and we'll check in with you next Wednesday night. Adios.